The autumn sun cast long shadows across Millbrook Elementary's soccer field as Commander James Williams stood quietly behind the chain-link fence, watching his 12-year-old son Marcus warm the bench for the third consecutive game. The boy's shoulders slumped with each passing minute as Coach Thompson called out names for substitutions, names that never included his. James checked his watch. 23 minutes left in the game, and Marcus hadn't touched the field once. Around him, other parents cheered from their lawn chairs, their voices growing louder with each near miss and successful play. But when Marcus finally got his chance in the dying minutes of the game, scoring a brilliant goal that tied the match, the cheers felt muted, obligatory. After the game, Coach Thompson approached James with a tight smile. "We need to talk about your son's attitude," he said, his voice carrying an edge that made James's jaw tighten. "There's a parent meeting tomorrow night. I think it would be good for you to hear what some of the other families have been saying." James nodded slowly, not trusting himself to speak. He didn't know it yet, but tomorrow night would change everything, not just for his family, but for an entire community that was about to learn exactly who they had been underestimating. The Millbrook Elementary School cafeteria buzzed with nervous energy as parents filled the plastic chairs arranged in neat rows. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across faces that wore expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. James Williams arrived precisely at 7 o'clock, choosing a seat in the back row where he could observe without drawing attention. Coach David Thompson commanded the room from behind a folding table, his 15 years of coaching experience evident in his authoritative posture. He wore his usual uniform, khaki pants, team polo, and a whistle that hung around his neck like a badge of office. The man had built his reputation on discipline and results, leading the Millbrook Lions to 3 district championships. Parents respected him, feared him, and rarely questioned his methods. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Thompson began, his voice echoing off the cafeteria walls. "We need to address some concerns that have been brought to my attention about team dynamics and certain players who seem to struggle with understanding their role." James felt eyes turning toward him, subtle but unmistakable. Mrs. Henderson, whose son played goalkeeper, shifted in her seat to get a better view. Mr. Davidson, the team treasurer, whispered something to his wife that made her nod knowingly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Thompson continued, his tone growing more pointed. "Some players and their families need to understand that this team operates on merit, discipline, and respect for authority. When players show attitude problems or fail to demonstrate the commitment we expect, it affects the entire team dynamic." "What kind of attitude problems are we talking about?" asked Mrs. Chen, whose daughter had been moved to starting midfielder after Marcus was benched. "Well, for instance," Thompson's eyes found James in the back row. "When players question coaching decisions, argue about playing time, or show disrespect for team rules, it creates a toxic environment. We've had parents who think their child deserves special treatment, who don't understand that this team has standards." The words hung in the air like poison gas. James knew exactly who Thompson was talking about. The only parent in the room whose child had been systematically excluded from meaningful playing time despite being one of the most talented players on the team. Marcus had never argued with the coach, never shown disrespect, never caused problems. But James had asked questions. He had requested meetings to discuss his son's development. He had suggested that perhaps the team might benefit from Marcus's speed and ball-handling skills. "Coach Thompson," James said, his voice steady but firm, "could you be more specific about these attitude problems? Because I think parents deserve to know exactly what behaviors you're concerned about. The room went silent. Thompson's face reddened slightly, caught off guard by the direct challenge. Well, James, since you're asking, I think we need to discuss whether your son is really a good fit for this team. Marcus has shown a pattern of behavior that suggests he might be more comfortable in a different environment. A different environment? James's military training kicked in, keeping his voice level despite the rage building in his chest. What kind of environment would that be? Look, I'm not trying to be confrontational here, Thompson said, but his tone suggested otherwise. But some kids just don't mesh well with our team culture. Maybe Marcus would be happier playing recreational league soccer where the expectations aren't as high. The suggestion landed like a slap. James had watched Marcus score more goals in practice than any other player on the team. He had seen his son's face light up when he talked about soccer, had listened to him recite team statistics, and analyze professional matches with the passion of a true student of the game. Marcus lived and breathed soccer, but he was being pushed out because he didn't fit someone's narrow definition of team culture. What exactly about Marcus doesn't fit your team culture? James pressed, his patience wearing thin. Thompson exchanged glances with several parents before answering. Well, for one thing, there's the issue of commitment. Marcus missed 2 practices last month. He had the flu, James interrupted. I called and spoke to you personally both times, and there's the question of whether he can handle the pressure of competitive play. Some kids are better suited for less intense environments. Less intense than what? Sitting on the bench for entire games? The room's energy shifted, parents becoming visibly uncomfortable with the confrontation. Some stared at their phones, others whispered among themselves. Mrs. Patterson, whose son had been Marcus's teammate since kindergarten, looked genuinely confused by the exchange. Thompson's mask began to slip. Look, James, I've been coaching for 15 years. I know talent when I see it, and I know attitude when I see it. Your son has skills, sure, but he doesn't have the character we need for this team. He's too aggressive on the field, too flashy. This team succeeds because we play as a unit, not because individual players try to show off. Aggressive? James's voice remained controlled, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. You're calling a 12-year-old boy aggressive for playing soccer with passion? I'm saying that some players need to learn their place on the team, and some parents need to accept that their children might not be cut out for competitive athletics. The words hit like physical blows. James understood now what was really happening. This wasn't about attitude or commitment or team chemistry. This was about a coach and a community that couldn't accept a young black boy who was better than their children, faster than their children, more passionate than their children. Marcus was being punished for excellence while being labeled as problematic. So what exactly are you suggesting, Coach? James asked, his military bearing evident in his perfect posture and controlled delivery. I'm suggesting that maybe it's time to consider whether Millbrook Elementary is the right fit for your family's needs. There are other schools, other programs that might be more suitable for Marcus's playing style. The euphemism wasn't lost on anyone in the room. James looked around at the faces surrounding him, some embarrassed, some nodding in agreement, most carefully neutral. These were his neighbors, parents he had greeted at school pickup, families he had assumed were part of his community. Now he saw them clearly for what many of them were, complicit in his son's systematic exclusion. And if we choose to stay? James asked quietly. Thompson's smile was cold and final. Then you need to accept the way things are done here. Accept that I make the decisions about playing time, about team composition, about what's best for these kids. If you can't do that, if you're going to continue questioning my authority and causing disruptions at team meetings, then maybe it's time to find another team. The ultimatum hung in the air like a challenge. James felt the weight of 30 pairs of eyes watching him, waiting to see if he would back down or escalate the confrontation. He thought about Marcus at home, probably practicing his footwork in the backyard under the porch light, still believing that hard work and dedication would eventually earn him a fair chance. James Williams had spent 25 years in the United States Navy, including multiple combat deployments and command positions that required him to make life-and-death decisions under pressure. He had faced down enemy combatants, navigated complex international incidents, and earned the respect of sailors and officers across the fleet. But sitting in that elementary school cafeteria, being told that his son didn't belong, he had never felt more powerless. "I understand your position perfectly, Coach Thompson," James said finally, his voice quiet but carrying a weight that made several parents look up from their phones. "And I want you to remember this conversation tomorrow." He stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. Every eye in the room followed him as he walked towards the exit, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. At the door he paused and turned back to face the room one last time. "You're right about one thing, Coach. Some people in this room definitely don't belong. We'll find out who soon enough." The drive home from the parent meeting passed in tense silence, James's hands gripping the steering wheel as he processed what had just occurred. 24 hours ago, he had been a respected member of the Millbrook community, a quiet, professional father who showed up to games, volunteered for fundraisers, and never caused problems. Now he was a troublemaker, a disruptor, a parent who didn't understand his place. Marcus was waiting in the living room when James arrived home, still wearing his practice gear and juggling a soccer ball between his feet. The boy's face lit up with hope when he saw his father, the same expression he wore every time he thought he might finally get his chance to prove himself on the field. "How did the meeting go, Dad? Did Coach Thompson say anything about giving me more playing time?" James looked at his son, this brilliant, passionate kid who still believed that fairness and merit mattered more than politics and prejudice, and felt his heart break a little more. How do you explain to a 12-year-old that the world doesn't always reward hard work? How do you tell your child that some battles can't be won with dedication and skill alone? We talked about a lot of things, Marcus, but I want you to know that no matter what happens, you keep working hard and playing the game the right way. Promise me that. "I promise, Dad. I'm going to show Coach Thompson that I deserve to start. I've been practicing my corner kicks, and I think I figured out how to curve the ball better." The next morning brought the first signs that the previous night's confrontation would have consequences beyond hurt feelings and wounded pride. James's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Patterson, the team mum who coordinated carpools and snack schedules. "Hi, James. I wanted to let you know that we've had to make some changes to the carpool rotation. We won't be able to include Marcus in our pickup schedule anymore. I hope you understand." The message was polite, apologetic even, but the meaning was crystal clear. Marcus was being isolated, cut off from the social connections that made youth sports more than just a game. James deleted the message without responding and drove Marcus to practice himself. At practice, the isolation became more apparent. While other parents gathered in their usual clusters along the sideline, sharing coffee and gossip, James found himself standing alone. Former friends nodded politely, but didn't approach. Conversations quieted when he walked by. He had become radioactive, someone to be avoided rather than engaged. Marcus felt the change too, though he tried to hide it. His teammates, influenced by their parents' attitudes, and Coach Thompson's obvious displeasure, began excluding him from their pre-practice warm-ups. Inside jokes were shared in whispers that stopped when Marcus approached. During scrimmages, passes that should have gone to him were directed elsewhere, even when he was in better position to score. Coach Thompson's treatment of Marcus became more pointed and public. During a particularly brutal practice session, he made Marcus run extra laps for showing off after the boy had executed a perfect bicycle kick during a drill. When Marcus questioned the punishment, Thompson's response was loud enough for every parent on the sideline to hear. "This is exactly the attitude problem I was talking about, Williams. You think you're special, but on my team, everyone follows the same rules. Maybe if you spent more time listening and less time trying to be the star, you'd understand what teamwork means." The other players watched in uncomfortable silence as Marcus ran his punishment laps alone, his cleats pounding against the grass in a rhythm that seemed to echo his frustration. James clenched his fists so tightly that his knuckles went white, but military discipline kept him silent. He had learned long ago that sometimes you have to endure injustice in order to position yourself for eventual victory. The situation deteriorated further when Marcus was benched for an entire game against their biggest rivals, the Westfield Warriors. Despite being one of the team's most skilled players, he watched from the sideline as Millbrook lost 3-1, their offense sputtering without his speed and creativity. Other parents grumbled about the loss, but none dared question Coach Thompson's decision to exclude his most talented player. After the game, Marcus finally broke down. Sitting in the passenger seat of his father's car, tears streaming down his face, he asked the question that James had been dreading. "Dad, why does Coach Thompson hate me? I work harder than anybody else. I know all the plays. I scored more goals than anyone in practice last week. But he acts like I'm not even on the team." James pulled the car over and turned to face his son, seeing his own childhood reflected in those frustrated tears. He remembered being the only black student in his advanced classes, being told by teachers that maybe he should consider more realistic career goals, being excluded from study groups and social events by classmates who saw him as different, threatening, other. "Marcus, sometimes people make decisions based on things that have nothing to do with your talent or your character. Coach Thompson isn't treating you fairly, and that's not your fault. It's his failing, not yours. But what can we do about it? I love soccer, Dad. I don't want to quit, but I can't keep sitting on the bench every game. It's not fair." James looked at his son and made a decision that would change everything. He had spent his entire military career following proper channels, respecting authority, working within established systems to create change. But sometimes systems are broken beyond repair. Sometimes you have to use every weapon in your arsenal to protect what matters most. You're not going to quit, Marcus, and you're not going to keep sitting on the bench either. Trust me on this. That evening, James made several phone calls from his home office, each one brief and professional. He contacted his commanding officer, his administrative assistant, and finally, a number that connected him directly to Naval Intelligence Headquarters in Washington. The conversations were coded, careful, but the message was clear. Commander Williams had a problem that required official attention. Meanwhile, across town, Coach Thompson was having his own conversations. At Millbrook Tavern, surrounded by his usual circle of supporters, he recounted the previous night's parent meeting with increasing embellishment and self-righteousness. "I told that Williams guy exactly what I thought about his attitude and his son's behavior," Thompson said, his third beer making him more expansive than usual. "Some people need to learn their place, you know? This is our community, our team, our traditions. If they don't like how we do things here, they can find somewhere else to play." His audience nodded approvingly, validating his decision and reinforcing the echo chamber that had convinced him he was in the right. None of them thought to ask what James Williams did for a living, where he had served, or what connections he might have outside their small community bubble. By Thursday morning, the school principal, Mrs. Margaret Foster, was beginning to receive phone calls that made her increasingly uncomfortable. The first came from the district superintendent, asking pointed questions about diversity policies and equal treatment of student athletes. The second came from a reporter at the regional newspaper, inquiring about allegations of discrimination in the school's sports programs. But it was the third call that made her blood run cold. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Mrs. Foster, this is Admiral Richardson from Naval Intelligence. I need to discuss one of your parents immediately. We have a situation involving Commander James Williams that requires your immediate attention and cooperation." Mrs. Foster's hand trembled as she wrote down the details, her mind racing to understand how a simple youth soccer dispute had suddenly escalated to involve the United States Navy. She had known James Williams for 3 years as a quiet, respectful parent who never caused problems. She had no idea that the man who attended school plays and volunteered for fundraisers held one of the most sensitive positions in the American military. As she hung up the phone, one thought echoed through her mind. What the hell had Coach Thompson gotten them all into? The pieces were falling into place with military precision, but the people of Millbrook had no idea that their small-town drama was about to become a national conversation. James Williams had spent decades learning how to fight wars, both visible and invisible. Now he was about to teach his community a lesson they would never forget. Friday morning dawned crisp and clear over Millbrook, the kind of perfect autumn day that usually filled the elementary school soccer field with excited voices and competitive energy. But today felt different. Mrs. Foster had barely slept, a conversation with Admiral Richardson playing on repeat in her mind like a nightmare that refused to end. At 8:15 a.m., her secretary buzzed the intercom with obvious anxiety in her voice. "Mrs. Foster, there's a call for you on line 1. The gentleman says he's from the Department of Defense." Mrs. Foster's coffee cup rattled against its saucer as she picked up the phone. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. "Mrs. Foster, this is Colonel Martinez from the Pentagon. I'm calling to inform you that we're conducting a preliminary investigation into potential civil rights violations involving one of our senior officers. Commander James Williams has filed a formal complaint alleging systematic discrimination against his minor child at your institution." The words hit Mrs. Foster like physical blows. Pentagon, senior officer, civil rights violations. This wasn't just about soccer anymore. This was about federal law, military protocol, and the kind of investigation that could destroy careers and close schools. I need to understand what we're dealing with here, Colonel. Commander Williams has always been a model parent. We've never had any complaints about discrimination. Mrs. Foster, I need you to understand something very clearly. Commander Williams is not just any parent. He holds top-secret clearance and is currently assigned to Naval Special Operations Command. His work involves national security matters that I cannot discuss over an unsecured line. When someone in his position reports discrimination, it becomes a federal matter immediately. Mrs. Foster felt the room spinning around her. Special operations, top-secret clearance, national security. The quiet man who had sat politely through parent-teacher conferences was apparently one of the most important military officers in the country. "What exactly happened to trigger this investigation?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "According to the complaint, your athletic coach has engaged in a pattern of discriminatory behavior, including public humiliation, exclusion from team activities, and making statements suggesting that Commander Williams's family should leave the school. The commander has documented evidence of these incidents. 20 minutes later, Mrs. Foster was speed-dialing Coach Thompson's number with shaking fingers. When he answered, his voice carried its usual confident tone, completely unaware that his world was about to implode. "David, I need you in my office immediately. We have a serious problem." "What kind of problem?" "I've got practice preparation to do. The kind of problem that involves the Pentagon, civil rights investigations, and possibly the end of your career. Get here now." When Thompson arrived 30 minutes later, his swagger had evaporated. Mrs. Foster had used the time to research James Williams online, discovering military commendations, congressional testimonies, and newspaper articles that painted a picture of a decorated war hero with connections throughout the defense establishment. "David, do you have any idea who James Williams actually is?" Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "He's just another parent who thinks his kid deserves special treatment. I've dealt with guys like him before." "Guys like him?" Mrs. Foster's voice rose dangerously. "David, the man you've been antagonizing is a Navy commander with 25 years of service, multiple combat deployments, and security clearance that puts him in the same rooms as admirals and generals. He's not just another parent. He's a senior military officer who apparently has the direct attention of the Pentagon." The color drained from Thompson's face as the implications began to sink in. "But he never said anything about being in the military. I had no idea." "That's not the point, David. The point is that you've been systematically discriminating against a child, and now the federal government is investigating us for civil rights violations. Do you understand what this means for the school? For your career? For all of us?" By noon, the situation had escalated beyond anything Mrs. Foster could have imagined. The district superintendent had called an emergency meeting. The school board had been briefed. Legal counsel had been consulted. And somewhere in Washington, military officials were reviewing a case that could result in federal charges. But the real shock came at 2:30 p.m., when the sound of rotor blades filled the air above Millbrook Elementary School. Parents arriving for afternoon pickup stopped their cars and stared in amazement as a massive military helicopter circled the school grounds. Children pressed their faces against classroom windows. Teachers abandoned their lesson plans, and the entire community held its collective breath as the aircraft prepared to land on the soccer field. The UH-60 Blackhawk touched down with mechanical precision, its rotors gradually slowing as a squad of uniformed personnel emerged from the aircraft. At their center walked a figure that many parents recognized, but none had truly understood. Commander James Williams, now wearing his dress blue uniform with ribbons and decorations that told the story of a career spent in service to his country. Mrs. Chen, who had questioned Marcus's attitude during the parent meeting, watched in stunned silence as she realized the quiet man she had dismissed was wearing the Navy Cross, the second highest military decoration for valor in combat. Mr. Davidson, who had whispered about certain families needing to know their place, stared at the Bronze Star and Purple Heart decorations that marked James as a wounded warrior who had bled for his country. Coach Thompson, who had demanded that James accept the way things are done here, found himself face to face with a man whose uniform displayed commendations from the Joint Chiefs of Staff, congressional recognition for distinguished service, and enough military honors to fill a display case. The crowd of parents and teachers that had gathered around the landing site fell silent as Commander Williams approached the school entrance, flanked by naval intelligence officers whose presence transformed the afternoon pickup routine into something resembling a federal investigation. Marcus, who had been called to the principal's office, emerged from the building to see his father in full military dress for the first time in his young life. The boy's eyes widened as he took in the uniform, the ribbons, the bearing of a man who commanded respect from admirals and generals. This wasn't just his dad. This was Commander Williams, a senior officer in the United States Navy. "Son," James said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "I want you to understand something very important. You never have to accept less than you deserve simply because someone else is uncomfortable with your excellence." The gathering crowd watched in fascination and growing horror as the implications of the scene unfolded before them. This wasn't just a parent upset about playing time. This was a senior military officer whose child had been discriminated against by people who had no idea who they were dealing with. Admiral Richardson, who had flown in from Washington specifically for this moment, addressed the assembled crowd with the kind of crisp authority that comes from commanding aircraft carriers and submarine fleets. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here to investigate allegations of systematic discrimination against the family of one of our most decorated officers. Commander Williams has served this country with distinction for 25 years, including multiple combat deployments and classified operations that I cannot discuss in public. His son deserves the same opportunities as any other child in this community." Coach Thompson, standing at the edge of the crowd, felt his knees go weak as he realized the magnitude of his miscalculation. The man he had dismissed as a troublemaker was not only a senior military officer, but someone with direct access to the highest levels of the Pentagon. The quiet parent he had tried to intimidate could probably make a phone call that would end careers and close schools. As the helicopter's rotors began to spin up for departure, Commander Williams turned to address the crowd one final time. His voice carried easily across the field, projecting the kind of natural authority that comes from leading sailors into combat and making decisions that affect national security. "This community will decide what kind of place it wants to be," he said, his words cutting through the afternoon air like a blade. "You can choose to be the kind of place that judges children by their character and their effort. Or you can continue to be the kind of place that my son and I will no longer tolerate." The Black Hawk lifted off, carrying with it any illusion that this was simply a dispute about youth soccer. This was now a federal case, a national story, and a reckoning that would reshape how Millbrook thought about fairness, justice, and the true meaning of service to community. The helicopter's departure left behind a silence so profound that even the autumn wind seemed to hold its breath. Coach David Thompson stood frozen on the sideline of the soccer field that had been his kingdom for 15 years, watching the aircraft disappear into the distance and taking with it any hope that this situation could be contained or controlled. Within hours, the video had gone viral. Cell phone footage of the military helicopter landing at an elementary school, combined with images of Commander Williams in his decorated uniform, spread across social media platforms faster than wildfire. Local news stations picked up the story by evening, national outlets by midnight, and by morning, Millbrook Elementary School was the center of a media firestorm that reached from coast to coast. Thompson's phone began ringing at 6 a.m. with calls from reporters, district officials, and angry parents who were just beginning to understand the magnitude of the scandal. His first instinct was to hunker down, to wait for the storm to pass, to hope that somehow this would all blow over like other controversies had in the past. But this wasn't like other controversies, and James Williams wasn't like other parents. The school district's emergency board meeting convened at 7 a.m. in a conference room packed with lawyers, administrators, and very nervous elected officials. Superintendent Patricia Hawkins, who had overseen the district for 8 years without a single major incident, found herself facing the worst crisis of her career. Ladies and gentlemen, we are dealing with a federal civil rights investigation involving a senior military officer, she announced to the somber gathering. The Department of Education has been notified, the Pentagon is involved, and we have reporters from major networks requesting interviews. This is no longer a local matter. Board member Robert Chen, whose wife had been at the infamous parent meeting, raised his hand with obvious reluctance. What exactly are our legal exposures here? Could we lose federal funding? Robert, we could lose everything. The district's attorney replied grimly. Title IX violations, civil rights violations, potential criminal charges if the Justice Department decides to get involved. Commander Williams has documented evidence of systematic discrimination, and he has the kind of political connections that can turn this into a national case study. Meanwhile, Coach Thompson was discovering that his 15 years of local success meant nothing when faced with the reality of federal investigation. His coaching license was suspended pending review. His teaching position at the high school was placed under administrative leave. The youth soccer league that had employed him for weekend tournaments terminated his contract immediately. But the most devastating blow came from his own community. Parents who had supported him just days earlier now crossed the street to avoid conversation. The Millbrook Tavern, where he had held court for years, asked him to find another place to drink. His wife received calls from longtime friends expressing their disappointment and their need to reevaluate their relationships. The systematic destruction of Thompson's position was methodical and complete. Commander Williams had not sought personal revenge. He had simply allowed the truth to emerge and let the system respond accordingly. Military precision applied to civilian justice with devastating effectiveness. Marcus returned to school on Monday to find a dramatically changed environment. Principal Foster had called an emergency assembly to address the situation, and her message to students, parents, and staff was unambiguous. Discrimination would not be tolerated. Every child deserved equal opportunity, and the school's policies were being completely reviewed and revised. The soccer team gathered for practice that afternoon under the supervision of a temporary coach, Mrs. Rodriguez, who had played Division I soccer in college and brought a completely different philosophy to the field. Her first act was to hold individual meetings with every player, starting with Marcus. "I've watched video of your playing," she told him, "and I want you to know that talent like yours deserves to be developed and showcased, not hidden on a bench. You're going to start in our next game, and you're going to keep starting as long as you continue to work hard and support your teammates." The game against Westfield Warriors 2 weeks later became a referendum on everything that had happened. The stands were packed with parents, media representatives, school officials, and community members who came to witness Marcus's first start in months. Commander Williams stood on the sideline in civilian clothes, but his military bearing was unmistakable to anyone who looked closely. Marcus scored 3 goals and assisted on 2 others, leading Millbrook to a 5-2 victory that showcased exactly what the team had been missing during his benching. But more importantly, he played with joy, creativity, and the kind of passionate excellence that reminded everyone why youth sports existed in the first place. After the game, several parents approached Commander Williams with apologies, explanations, and requests for forgiveness. His response was measured but firm. "I'm not interested in your apologies. I'm interested in your actions moving forward. My son and every other child deserve better than what happened here." The investigation concluded 3 months later with findings that confirmed everything Commander Williams had alleged. Coach Thompson was banned from coaching youth sports in the district, the school's athletic policies were completely rewritten, and mandatory diversity training was implemented for all staff and volunteers. The financial settlement, while confidential, was reportedly substantial enough to fund Marcus's college education and establish a scholarship program for underrepresented student athletes. Thompson himself disappeared from public view, relocating to another state where his reputation hadn't preceded him. His LinkedIn profile listed him as a freelance consultant, though no consulting work seemed to materialize. The man who had once commanded respect and authority in his community had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of assuming that power and position make someone untouchable. The most satisfying moment came 6 months later, when Marcus was named team captain and led Millbrook to their first district championship in 4 years. As he lifted the trophy above his head, surrounded by teammates who now saw him as a leader rather than an outsider, Commander Williams felt a satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice. The quiet man who had endured insults and humiliation in a school cafeteria had taught an entire community that assumptions about power, position, and privilege could be dangerously wrong. Sometimes the person you underestimate is exactly the person who has the capability and connections to ensure that underestimation becomes your downfall. 2 years later, Marcus Williams stood in the center of Millbrook Elementary's soccer field, now serving as team captain and the undisputed star of a program that had been completely transformed. The scoreboard showed another victory, but the real triumph was visible in the diverse group of players celebrating around him, kids from every background who knew they would be judged solely on their effort and character. Commander Williams watched from the sideline with quiet pride, not just in his son's athletic success, but in the young man Marcus had become. The boy who had once sat silently on the bench while enduring discrimination had grown into a leader who stood up for teammates facing similar challenges. When a new player from El Salvador joined the team speaking limited English, Marcus spent extra time helping him learn the plays. When parents questioned the coach's decision to start a girl on the previously all-male team, Marcus publicly supported her inclusion. The transformation extended far beyond soccer. Millbrook Elementary had become a model for inclusive athletics, hosting conferences on diversity in youth sports and serving as a case study for other districts facing similar challenges. The scholarship program established from the legal settlement had helped 12 students pursue higher education, with Marcus serving as a mentor to each recipient. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had taken over as head coach after Thompson's departure, built the program around the principles that Commander Williams had fought to establish: merit-based selection, equal opportunity for development, and respect for every player regardless of background. Under her leadership, the team had won 3 consecutive district championships while maintaining the highest academic standards in the league. The ripple effects reached into the broader community as well. The Millbrook School Board had appointed Commander Williams to chair a new committee on educational equity, and his recommendations had led to significant changes in hiring practices, curriculum development, and student support services. The man who had been told his family didn't belong had become one of the most respected voices in local education policy. Marcus's academic success paralleled his athletic achievements. His grades had improved dramatically once he was no longer carrying the emotional burden of systematic exclusion, and college recruiters were already expressing interest in his combination of soccer skills and leadership potential. But perhaps more importantly, he had developed the kind of character that would serve him well, regardless of which path his future took. The annual team banquet became a celebration not just of wins and losses, but of the values that now defined Millbrook soccer. Commander Williams was invited to speak, and his message resonated with parents and players alike. Excellence isn't just about individual achievement. It's about creating an environment where everyone has the opportunity to reach their potential. The media attention had eventually faded, but the institutional changes remained. New coaches underwent extensive training on bias recognition and inclusive leadership. Parent meetings included discussions of team values and behavioral expectations. Most importantly, there was now a clear process for addressing concerns and complaints, ensuring that no family would face the kind of systematic exclusion that the Williams family had endured. 3 former teammates from Marcus's benching period had reached out over the years to apologize for their silence during those difficult months. Each conversation had been handled with the grace and maturity that characterized Marcus's approach to everything in his life. He understood that children often reflect their parents' attitudes, and he harbored no resentment toward classmates who had been caught up in adult conflicts. The most meaningful recognition came when the State Soccer Association named Marcus their Youth Leadership Award recipient, not for his statistics or championships, but for his role in promoting inclusion and sportsmanship throughout the region. The ceremony was held at the same field where his father had once been told to leave, with Commander Williams in the audience wearing civilian clothes but military pride. As Marcus prepared to graduate from elementary school and move on to middle school soccer, he carried with him lessons that extended far beyond athletics. He had learned that injustice could be overcome through persistence and proper channels. He had seen firsthand how one person's courage could transform an entire system. Most importantly, he understood that true leadership meant using your position to lift up others who faced similar challenges. Commander Williams's military career had taught him to think strategically, to use available resources effectively, and to never back down from a fight worth winning. But his role as a father had taught him something even more valuable: that the most important battles are often fought not on distant battlefields, but in school cafeterias and soccer fields, where children learn what kind of world they're going to inherit. The quiet man who had endured humiliation in order to document discrimination had created a legacy that would benefit countless children for generations to come. His victory wasn't measured in personal satisfaction or professional revenge, but in the knowledge that no other child would have to sit on a bench simply because their parent didn't fit someone else's narrow definition of belonging. The story of Commander Williams and his son Marcus isn't just about one family's fight against discrimination. It's a blueprint for anyone who has ever been told they don't belong, don't deserve equal treatment, or should accept less than their worth. Every community has its own version of Coach Thompson, its own systems that perpetuate inequality, its own moments when good people choose silence over justice. Your voice matters more than you realize. When you witness unfairness and choose to speak up, you join a tradition of courage that stretches from military heroes to everyday parents who refuse to accept the unacceptable. When you document discrimination, demand accountability, and work through proper channels to create change, you honor everyone who has fought these battles before you. But remember, lasting change requires more than momentary outrage. It demands the kind of strategic thinking that Commander Williams demonstrated, building documentation, understanding systems, using every available resource to create institutional transformation. Your personal fight for justice becomes part of a larger movement when you focus on changing policies, not just winning individual battles. The children in your community are watching how you respond to injustice. They're learning from your choices whether to stand up for what's right or stay silent for what's comfortable. Every time you choose courage over convenience, you teach the next generation that excellence and character matter more than politics and prejudice. Marcus Williams became a leader not because his father was powerful, but because his family refused to accept systematic exclusion. That same leadership potential exists in every child who faces discrimination, in every parent who fights for fairness, in every community member who chooses progress over the status quo. Stand up, speak out, fight smart, document everything, use every resource available to you, work through proper channels while preparing for the moment when those channels fail you. Most importantly, remember that your fight for justice isn't just about you. It's about creating a world where every child has the opportunity to reach their potential. Because in the end, we're not just raising athletes or students or future leaders. We're raising citizens who will either perpetuate the systems that failed them or transform those systems for everyone who comes after. The choice is yours, the power is real, and the children are watching. What will you choose?